Why is Gen Z having a tough time in the dating market? So instead of lumping Gen Z into sort of one group, I'm going to analyze men and women ages 18 through 25, give you guys some statistics, and then give my take on it sort of at the end. So when we ask the question of why men and women ages 18 through 25 are struggling dating, we have to analyze what we value in each other and what we find important in each other, right? So I'm sure if you guys have been following me or you've been following certain people online who discuss dating, I'm sure you guys have heard some sort of red pill philosophies regarding age and what we look for as far as reproductive qualities and things of that sort. So typically, you've probably heard the saying that men peak later in life and women's peak is earlier in life, right? So with that being said, men ages 18 through 25, right, which is typically a peak, that's typically the peak for women, right, ages 18 to 25 as far as their beauty, right? Their beauty is what they are valued for, right? That is the direct thing that affects their ability to reproduce successfully. Men, on the other hand, their ability to reproduce successfully is their what? Their muscle, their physique, their money, right? Because that directly affects the child's potential for a successful, it affects the child's ability to grow up without having so much suffering and problems and struggle, right? So if the guy's making a lot of money, right, and he's valued basically for his income, then it's safe to say that, the child will probably not die, right, or not have problems and suffer. So with that being said, Gen Z as a whole, right, I don't think Gen Z is suffering as far as like a group, because women, right, they get approached every single day, right? They're getting DMs if they're on social media. They're getting people, asking them to go out, to go on a date, basically, right? They're the ones being approached. The guys aren't being approached, right? So as far as Gen Z goes, it's not really about just Gen Z. It's more or less, right? Like, men look for sex, right? Men primarily, the valuable thing that they can get from women is sex, because if you can't get sex from a woman, you're not going to get a baby, right? So if a woman wants to have sex with you, then there's the potential for her to also want to have a baby with you, right? I'm not saying that that's always the case, right? But if she doesn't want to have sex with you, you're definitely not getting a baby, right? So as far as like reproduction goes, right, that's something that you have to keep in mind. So women, right, can get sex anywhere, right? Because we know that men are horny. Men have higher levels of testosterone. We have higher sex drive. So with that knowledge, you can figure that it's easy for women to get sex, right? Because the people approaching her, which is men, are hungry for it, right? We can pretty much do it at any time of the day. There's not a huge there's pretty much no burden of performance on women to deliver any form of value outside of their beauty, right? So it's for sexual access, not relationship, right? That's different. But as far as just sexual access, so moving on to relationships, right? How this affects like Gen Z and getting together, right, at a younger age, right? Women ages 18 through 25, for the most part, unless you're an exceptional man that young in life, right? They typically don't want men their age, right? They want men that are older, right? Because men that are older typically make more money because they've been working longer, they have more experience in life, they have more things to give as far as their value goes. So like I pulled some stats. Men ages 18 through 25, working full time. So this isn't including students or kids in high school or kids in college. This is just men working full time in America. The annual income is somewhere between $42,000 and $45,000 a year, which again isn't terrible, right? But as far as what a woman's looking for, right, the average woman, so let's look at the numbers for women ages 18 through 25. They're making somewhere between $37,000 and $39,000 per year, right? And again, depending on state, for some states that's not bad. For some states that's near the damn poverty line. So if we analyze that, right, like it's also known that women typically want men that either make just as much as them or make 50% or more, right? So if a woman makes $25,000 a year, let's just say, she would want a man who at least makes that amount, like 30 or 40,000 or more, right? So now obviously it's different depending on how much you make. Like a woman who makes 20,000 a year probably doesn't want a man who also makes that, right? Because that's not enough, right? Now, if a woman makes $100,000 a year and her man makes $100,000 a year, okay, because that's not as bad, right? Because at least you can survive, right? So with these numbers, right, you can easily look and attribute a lot of the problems. I believe men are having, I think, more problems with relationships because we have the burden of performance, right? So if men don't perform, relationships don't flourish, right? That's just, yeah, okay, you might be able to hook up, you might look good, you might be charismatic, but as far as relationships and then leading into marriage and family, that's not, the attraction, or I'm sorry, the arousal features that get women to want to have sex with you aren't going to be enough to obviously sustain you all the way into a long-term relationship and then marriage, right? Because that just doesn't work like that. Once you get into a relationship, it's more about money and security and being able to provide for not only yourself but your women and the potential children that you may have. So I think that we have a very tough situation here at hand as far as dating goes in the 21st century, and I just think it's largely attributed to women having more choice now, right? Like with social media, like for example, right, back in the 90s, right, when, and even like early 2000s, back when the internet wasn't as prevalent as it is now, you were kind of more centered, you were kind of forced in a way to date people that were in your local area, right? So your local town, your local city, right? Or maybe the town over, but you weren't able to date people that were across the globe. You weren't able to, meet people on the internet and fly them out, right, to your local city or your local town to meet, right? So as far as options go, women have more options because there's just more guys on social media, right, that are, like a lot of successful guys are on social media, right, because they can make money online. So women don't necessarily need to meet the guy that they want in their local area, right? They can meet the man that they want online. So that's another factor that is also inhibiting the ability for Gen Z men and women being able to meet together and being able to form a relationship and then obviously lead have that lead into marriage or children. So it's just more so the problems are stemming more so from I think men. Obviously there's problems with women too, like the standards also are very high as far as the prettier women. I'm not gonna say this because it's opinion. It's a fact, right? Like the prettier a woman is, right, the more options she has, the more she gets approached, the higher her standards are gonna be, right? If you have, like, let's say you're hiring for your firm, right? Like you're looking out for people who you want to work for you. If you are looking for people to work for you, right, and you have a wide array of people applying to your firm, right, you have what? You have more choice. So if you have more choice, that by default puts you in the abundance position, and that puts you in the position where you can be more choosy, right? So with the knowledge of women having being seen as more beautiful by more men, right, that by default gives her more choice, right? If you have a woman that's maybe a 6 or 7, right, who doesn't get a lot of guys approaching her or DMing her or calling her or like just trying to get with her, right? Let's say she has 3 guys wanting to get with her, and a girl who's at 8 or 9 has 10 guys getting with her. Who do you think is going to have higher standards? Obviously it's the one who's getting 10 possible leads, right? So we have to look at also women's beauty and being able to connect that to their standards, right? So unfortunately speaking, women don't see that there are a very small percentage of men, right, that make the amount of money that they want, right? Like every girl's like, I want a guy who makes 6 figures or more, right? or I want a guy who makes 200,000 or 300,000 or a millionaire, right? God forbid a fucking millionaire, right? Like that's their standard level, right? I'm not saying it's impossible to meet that guy, right? Like obviously, you know, the higher you go, the harder, the less likely it is for you to meet that guy. But I'm saying, as far as standards go, like, you know, let's say that girl who's getting 10 leads from guys on a weekly basis, right? Right? If 6 of those guys are making $100,000 a year, right, and 4 of them are making less, right, she might decline all of them because she's like, damn, like, you know, if 6 guys are approaching me and they're making $100,000 a year, right, what if I can maybe if I get 10 more leads next week, I might be able to meet a guy who makes 200 or 300, right? And I'm again, this is just an example, but it just goes to show you like how women view dating, right? And they are the gatekeepers to sex, right? Like, you know, unfortunately speaking, if women choose who reproduces in the gene pool, right? I know that doesn't sound nice and it doesn't sound correct, like, you know, politically correct, but women are the choosers when it comes to who reproduces and who doesn't, right? So you know, they did I'm just thinking back, you know, I read a book, it's called Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters, right? And in the book, the author was talking about how women and men sort of have different, like, as far as sex goes, like men will have sex with pretty much most women, right? If a girl goes up to a man and asks him, hey, do you want to have sex with me? You know, I would say 80% of men would probably say yes if the girl's attractive, right? As opposed to, let's say there's an attractive guy, right, and he goes up to a bunch of women, right? Maybe only 20% of the women would say yes, as opposed to 80% of the guys saying yes, right? So I think they actually did that on a college campus. I don't know what year it was. It might have been 2014. Don't quote me on that. But basically, that just goes to show you that we don't look for the same things, right? If 80% of guys are willing to have sex with a beautiful woman, that implies that she doesn't have to have a burden of performance as far as making money, being charming. Like, she could be not so charming, have a shit personality, not be funny, not be charismatic, not have a lot of interesting things to say, or just have like or just be intelligent, right? And she could still get 80% of guys to want to have sex with her, right? But again, on the other hand, if you're an attractive guy, right, let's say you're good looking and you go up to 100 women, right, and only 10 of them say yes to having sex with you, right, that goes to show you that women have different things that they look for outside of looks. So that's why I think that's really just tells you everything you need to know as far as, you know, why Gen Z, you know, as like a group of men and women are struggling, right? Because we don't look for the same things, right? And especially in today's economy, right, it's harder for I mean, it's not hard. Like, if you see the opportunities and you're ambitious and you can really, you know, capitalize on things that are available to you, it's really not that hard to make money. But your average guy who's just lazy or just doesn't really care that much to like see the value in leveling up in life financially, yeah, I mean, those are the guys who are going to struggle. Those are the guys who are going to not have a good chance of dating, especially in that 18 to 25 range. Like me, I've been in a relationship for 2 years, right? Because why? Because, I mean, let's be fair, I'm pretty good looking, right? And also my girl sees that I'm working on bettering my life, right? I make about $50,000 a year right now in my job, right? That's not including my side hustle. That's not including stocks or investments. So, you know, I'm not trying to brag or anything. I'm just trying to make a point that, like, there's not a lot of guys that are like, you know, us, right? You guys who watch this channel, you guys think alike, you guys do the same things, you know, and so that limits women's ability to date in that 18 to 25 range. And also it limits men who are in that 18 to 25 range who aren't getting after it, who don't make a lot of money, who aren't, you know, working towards more. And, you know, again, that directly affects why we can't date successfully and why we can't be in harmonious relationships in that, you know, 18 to 25, 26, 27 range, which would be considered Gen Z. So, yeah, guys, that's it. That's all. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe. If you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them down below. And as always, I will talk to you guys soon. Peace.